Okay, so this is the afternoon session of August 31st, Saturday, August 31st, the 2:10 session. So we're going to go through now, we're looking at the Sutta approach to dependent origination. So in the morning, I explained the sort of governing principles of the Sutta approach. And now we're going to look at some other things that are said in the suttas or the Buddha's discourses about dependent origination. And we find that in the suttas on dependent origination, the Buddha doesn't teach dependent origination exclusively in terms of the 12 factors in the familiar sequence, but we find various ways in which the Buddha discusses this teaching. Sometimes uses different terminology, but eventually he sort of leads it into the series of conditions and conditioned phenomena. Okay, so now we come to a sutta. It's almost all of these suttas that I'm taking are from the chapter 12 in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses of the Buddha. That chapter is called the Nidana Samyutta, and it collects many of the short suttas on dependent origination. And so this is from the Nidana Samyutta, Sutta number 20. So here the Tathagata is another name for the Buddha. Whether there is an arising of Tathagatas or no arising of Tathagatas, that element still persists. This stability of the Dharma, this fixed course of the Dhamma, specific conditionality. So this principle that birth is the condition for aging and death, of course, this doesn't depend on the arising of Buddhas or the non-arising of Buddhas, but that is a kind of fixed, stable, unvarying, invariable, unchangeable law of the governing the nature of existence. And there's a series of Pali expressions that is used here. The first is called a dhatu. So the word dhatu seems to have various meanings, but we find the word dhatu used in regard to the four primary elements of the body, the pattavi dhatu, the earth element, apu dhatu, the water element, tejo dhatu, the fire element, vayu dhatu, the air element. And here, dependent origination, this relationship between the conditioned and the conditioned phenomena, is called a dhatu. So it's an element in the sense of a principle. Maybe principle is a good term to use. That principle remains. It's something steady, inflexible, and variable. Then it's called Dhamma Titata. So the word tita is based on that same word tita, standing. So it's literally the standingness of the Dhamma. Dhamma niyamata. Niyama means a fixed law, something which is invariable, definite, certain. So this is something, a certain, fixed, definite law governing the relations between phenomena. And then we come to this expression translated as specific conditionality, which is ida pachayata. And this comes from the use of idang and pachaya. So idang means this, literally it's this. And then pachaya is a condition. So what happens is that the ung sound gets assimilated to the p, so it becomes ida pachaya. So having this as condition. And then ta makes it an abstract noun. So it's the fixed law that old age and death has this as condition, namely birth, and that each of the other links in the chain of conditions has its predecessor as its fixed condition. Okay, so this is, you call it the nature of existence, the fixed law of existence, the fixed course of the Dhamma, that things arise dependent on specific conditions. Each thing has its specific conditions, not just the general principle of conditionality, but this arises dependent upon that. And so that is the nature of existence. And the task of a Buddha is to awaken to this, to penetrate it, to break through to it. And then having done so, he explains it, he teaches it, proclaims it, establishes it, discloses it, analyzes it, elucidates it, and he says, see, with birth as condition, aging and death occurs. Okay, so the task of a Buddha is to discover this invariable relationship and then make it known to the world. And so the same structure is applied to each pair of conditions, right down to with ignorance as condition, volitional formations or sankharas occur. So in each case, this is the fixed relationship, the nature of phenomena, that this depends on that. A Buddha awakens to this, discovers it, breaks through to it and penetrates it thoroughly, and then he proclaims it and teaches it and elucidates it, saying, see, with ignorance as condition, volitional formations occur. And then he goes on to say, this is the interesting statement. He says, the actuality in this, the inerrancy, the invariability, specific conditionality, this is called dependent origination. So the key, there are actually four key words here. First, the word tattata. This, maybe you could even translate this literally as suchness or thusness. So the word tatta is when you point something out and you say, that's the way it is. And so you turn this into an abstract noun, that's the way it isness of it. So that's here translated actuality, which is rather weak because tattata has such a rich meaning. It's like I remember back in the 1960s, we used to watch the news broadcast of Walter Cronkite, and at the end of each program he would say, that's the way it is, say August 30th, 31st, 1967. So that's the way it is would be tattata. And then avitatata is just the double negation of that. So something vitata is something which is false, not the case, but it's being negated, avitatata. So here translated inerrancy, that there's no mistake in this, no fluctuations or variations, but this is the way things are. Then anyatata, that things are not other than the way being pointed out. And then we have, again, specific conditionality. So this, the Buddha says, this is called paticca samuppada, dependent origination. Okay, the next sutta speaks about 44 cases of knowledge. So these are the 44 kinds of knowledge that a disciple should acquire in order to make the breakthrough to the initial stage of enlightenment. And so there's the knowledge. One starts off with the knowledge. Let's say the basic formula is one knows the specific factor itself, one knows its origin, one knows its cessation, and one knows the way leading to its cessation. So one starts off, here it goes in reverse order. One starts off with knowledge of old age and death. One knows its origin, knows its cessation, knows the way leading to its cessation. And so the question comes, then what is aging and death? So we had the definition already in the sutta we looked at this morning. What is aging? The growing old of beings and the different orders of beings, graying of hair, wrinkling of skin. What is death? The passing away, perishing, disappearance of beings. And so we have the meaning of old age and death. Then what is the origin of old age and death? With the arising of birth, there is the arising of old age and death. So it's when birth occurs that makes old age and death inescapable, inevitable. And then to overcome old age and death, one has to put an end to birth. And so with the cessation of birth, there is the cessation of old age and death. And so what is the way leading to the ending of old age and death? The Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, and this is the interesting part. So now the Buddha says that when a noble disciple thus understands old age and death, its origin, cessation, and the way to cessation, this is, here the Pali has the expression, dhamme jnanam. It's the knowledge of the principle. And then he says, by means of this principle that is seen, understood, immediately attained, immediately fathomed, one applies the method to the past and to the future. And so one knows that anyone in the past who directly knew old age and death, its origin, cessation, and so forth, all these directly knew it in the very same way that I do now. So whoever knows old age and death in the past has to know that it originates from birth and ceases with the cessation of birth. Whoever in the future will directly know aging and death will know it in the very same way that I do now. So whatever old age and death occurs in the future, one will know definitely that old age and death has occurred dependent upon birth. And so this is called it's very difficult to translate this term. I translated it as knowledge of entailment, or maybe inferential knowledge. The Pali word is anvaye jnanam. So this is the knowledge of what follows from what one can directly know for oneself. So what one directly knows in the present is that old age and death occurs dependent upon birth. And so then one can infer from that in the past it's always been so. We go back centuries upon centuries to the beginning of human life on Earth, go back past the beginning of human life on Earth to all the forms of animal life, the period of the dinosaurs. We knew that we can know that the dinosaurs grew old and died because they were born. And going back to the earliest forms of life on Earth, and even in other world systems in the distant past, we know all birth, all old age and death occurred because of birth. And we can infer that it will be the same in the future. I don't know what scientists might do. Maybe they'll invent life forms that don't grow old and die, but so far as we can determine, that probably won't be possible. Okay, so the trainee's true knowledge, who has entered the stream of the Dhamma, the noble one with penetrative wisdom, who stands squarely before the door to the deathless. So one who has this knowledge is not yet an arahant, not yet at the end of the path, but he or she becomes a trainee, one who is equipped with the knowledge that will lead definitely to liberation. So that is the mark of the trainee, one who has entered the stream of the Dhamma. In other words, a stream enter, from a stream enter on up, that one has acquired for oneself this correct knowledge of dependent origination. And so this is applied all the ways back to understanding the sankharas, the volitional formations, their origin, their cessation, and the way to their cessation. Okay, this is an extremely important sutta, but I think I'm going to come back to it. Let me go to this is the one that I want. Yeah, because I think that sutta becomes clearer if we take this sutta first. So here the Buddha says, I will teach you the origin and passing away of the world. And so this is not, a speculative theory about the origin of the physical universe, but this, we could say, is the origin and passing away of the world of experience, or the world in which we are situated. Because usually we think that this world has some kind of objective existence, and we just happen to be sort of thrown into this world. But actually, the world is, in a sense, a reflection of our own inner state, in that our consciousness, our mind, is keyed to this particular realm in which we're living, and it's this world in which we're living is a reflection of the deep, basic consciousness. And so here, the Buddha is speaking about the origin and passing away of the world. Okay, so he says, in dependence on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. So we see here part now of the formula for dependent origination. consciousness. But now the beginning point is different. So he's not saying in dependence on the sankharas, consciousness arises, but we have the I and then their objects, forms. And so it's when the I encounters visible forms that I consciousness arises. Then the meeting of the three, the meeting of the consciousness with forms, the visible forms through the I, that is called contact. Then with contact as condition, then feeling arises. Then with feeling as condition, sort of the normal response is craving. With craving as condition, there is clinging. With clinging as condition, there is more existence, the creation of the karmic conditions for new existence. Let's say, the inclination of the mind towards new existence as determined by one's volitional activities, one's karma. With existence as condition, there is birth. With birth as condition, there is old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair. So this is the origin of the world. So this is the way we create the world. We bring ourselves back again and again into the world through the arising. We sort of a fixed situation is having the 6 sense faculties which encounter objects. The same is specified for the other senses. So we're in this world with our sense faculties encountering objects. Then out of that encounter there comes feeling, and then it's when we respond to the feeling with craving that we set in motion that process that will bring us back into the world through birth, and then from birth continuing to old age and death. So that, the Buddha says, that's the origin of the world. Then there is the passing away of the world. This is, we can also call this liberation from the world. So first, we start off with the same situation, that we have the 6 senses. They encounter their objects, that's contact. Then with contact as condition, again, there is feeling. And then with feeling as condition, craving arises sort of as a natural response to the feeling. But now, instead of surrendering to the craving and flowing along with the craving, one undertakes the practice which puts an end to that craving. And so through the cultivation of the path, there comes the fading away and cessation of that craving. With the cessation of craving comes cessation of clinging or grasping. With the cessation of clinging, there's no more generating of these karmic formations that will produce new existence. And so with the cessation of existence comes cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, old age and death, sorrow, and so forth cease. So that, the Buddha says, that's the cessation of this whole mass of suffering, and that is the passing away of the world. Okay, so now we can go back to maybe take the sutta on the wise man and the fool. Okay, so here the Buddha begins by saying, for the fool who is hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, this body has originated. So it's through ignorance and craving that we have acquired this body together with its consciousness. And so there is this body, and then there's external name and form, including the objects and the senses. And so there's this duality or dyad of the conscious body, external name and form, and then dependent on this dyad or duality, there is contact. And there is the six sense bases contacted through which the fool experiences pleasure and pain. And the same is true for the wise person. The wise person also acquires the body through ignorance and craving. And with this body, the wise person encounters name and form, this dyad, and then dependent on the dyad, there is contact. And there is these six bases through which the contact takes place. And then the wise person also experiences pleasure and pain. So what is the distinction? What is the disparity? What is the difference between the wise person and the fool? So then the text, the Buddha gives the answer himself, that for the fool, that ignorance has not been abandoned and that craving has not been destroyed. And the reason is that the fool, the foolish person, has not lived the spiritual life for the complete destruction of suffering. And so with the breakup of the body, the fool passes on to another body, and then passing on to the other body, he's not freed from birth, aging, and death, not freed from suffering. But the wise person also acquires this body, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. But for the wise person, that ignorance is abandoned and that craving is destroyed. For what reason? Because the wise person has lived the holy life for the complete destruction of suffering. So that's the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the wise person and the foolish person, the living of the spiritual life, the holy life. Okay, so what the sutta shows is that what brings us back into this body is ignorance and craving. And once we acquire this body through ignorance and craving, again, we make contact with the world through the six sense bases. And in the case of the foolish person, that person responds to the contacts with the objects through more ignorance and more craving. And so the foolish person moves on from life to life through the cycle of repeated birth and death. But the wise person, the one who also acquires this body through ignorance and craving, lives the spiritual life, the life of sila, moral discipline, samadhi, concentration, and panya, wisdom. And with wisdom destroys ignorance, eradicates the craving, and then becomes free from the bondage to the renewed existence in the future. Yeah, this is a very interesting sutta, a rather difficult one. It's very terse, quite difficult from the terminology to figure out. So I just have to give my interpretation. Okay, so the text says, what one intends and what one plans and what one has a tendency towards, this becomes a basis for the continuance of consciousness. And I want to take the Pali text. So what's translated, what one intends, is young cheteti. So the verb cheteti is connected with the noun chetana. It's the basis for the noun chetana. Chetana is what we translate volition. And chetana is the decisive factor behind the sankharas. So it's chetana that generates the sankharas. And then what one plans, in a way, this is an attempt at translating the word pakapeti, the verb pakapeti, which seems to be used here almost as a synonym for cheteti. And pakapeti, sort of the base word here is kappa, which suggests the idea of constructing something. So it's what one constructs. So it's through, the idea seems to be that through one's volitions, one constructs things, one plans, and then one engages in activity by which one is constructing the things in our immediate environment, but also constructing a future world for ourselves. And then the third term that occurs here, I've had to translate this in a rather clumsy way, whatever one has a tendency towards. But it's all representing the one verb, anuseti. And anuseti is related to the noun anusaya, is what we translate as latent tendency. And probably the latent tendencies here would be the tendencies to ignorance and craving. And so in this one sentence, we have, through the latent mention of what one has a tendency towards, this is suggesting, to my mind, the presence of ignorance and craving. And then it's through that ignorance and craving that one intends and plans things. That shows the operation of the sankharas. One is generating sankharas through ignorance and craving. And these intentions or volitions and latent tendencies, that becomes the basis for the continuation of consciousness. And so what the text seems to be saying, actually I have the Pali here, is that the latent tendencies and the volitional activities, the sankharas, work together to propel consciousness at death beyond the event of death into a new existence. So those volitions and the latent tendencies are the basis for the continuation of consciousness. And so when there is that basis for the continuation of consciousness, these things become the support for consciousness, this stream of consciousness, to become established in, planted in a new existence. And so consciousness is like a seed which gets planted in some new realm of existence. And then it comes to growth, it starts to grow and brings in a future renewed existence. And so once there is this production of a future renewed existence, then there will be future birth, old age, and death, and so on. And that's the origin of this whole mass of suffering. And then the text goes on to say, when one does not intend and does not plan, but still has this tendency towards something. So this, I think, is indicating that somebody who is able to attain like these deep jhanic attainments, where one is not engaging in overt activities, manifest activities, but the latent tendencies are still there. They've not yet developed the wisdom that has eradicated ignorance and craving. So still those latent tendencies towards ignorance and craving propel consciousness forward into the new existence. But it's when one does not intend and does not plan and does not have a tendency towards anything that no basis exists for the continuation of consciousness. Of course, that doesn't mean that you become a vegetable. But what it means is that especially one eradicates ignorance and craving, and then one will still have volitions and plan things and do things, but those volitions and plans and intentions are no longer constructing a future existence. They're no longer laying the basis for the continuation of consciousness. And so when there's no basis, there is no establishing of consciousness in the future, no establishing of consciousness, no growth, and no production of future renewed existence. And in that case, no birth, no old age and death. That's the cessation of this mass of suffering. This is maybe a useful one. Okay, so this sutta shows, again, in a rather concrete way, how through the arising of craving, the cycle of dependent origination continues, and then how through the cessation of craving, the cycle comes to an end. And this shows a different way how craving arises, or shows the arising of craving from a different angle. Here the text says, when one dwells contemplating gratification in things that can be clung to, in other words, in objects that are potential sources of clinging. And to contemplate gratification means to see these things as enjoyable. And so when we see things, the objects of the senses, as pleasant, agreeable, enjoyable, then craving increases. And then with craving as condition, clinging comes to be, and then all the other factors in the sequence of dependent origination. And then the Buddha illustrates this with the example of a great bonfire. And so suppose we have a great bonfire, and it's consuming many loads of wood, and then a man throws dry grass cow dung, and more logs of wood onto the bonfire. And in this way, that great bonfire is consuming more and more wood, continues to burn for a very long time, indefinitely into the future. And so this is what happens when one lives contemplating enjoyment in objects of clinging. That observing things, looking always for the aspect of pleasure, the potential for pleasure, is what nurtures the craving. So the antidote to this is to dwell contemplating the Pali word is the adinava, the danger, the drawback, the disadvantage in things that can be clung to. So instead of seeing things as pleasant and enjoyable, one sees that these things are impermanent. One sees if one clings to these things, it will result in suffering. And so through that contemplation of danger, craving diminishes and eventually ceases. And with the cessation of craving comes cessation of clinging, cessation of existence, birth, old age, and death. So this is illustrated by the example of a great bonfire that's burning, consuming masses of wood, and then a man doesn't feed it with more dry grass, cow dung, and dry wood. Actually, what I would say is that the man puts on the great mass of fire, he throws sand on it and water, and then that great mass of fire will exhaust its former supply of fuel, and then since it's not getting any more fuel, the fire goes out. And so this is like when one contemplates the danger in objects of clinging, craving ceases. With the cessation of craving, cessation of clinging, and so forth, until the whole mass of suffering comes to an end. Okay, maybe now, rather than start another sutta, we can take our break. And this time we have, as I told you, a little change in the schedule. So I'm going to introduce Allison Joe. She is an expert in yoga and various kinds of bending and stretching exercises. Because we've been sitting for an hour, 20 minutes, so she'll help us to break this torpor and lethargy that comes in from too much sitting. Do you want to come up to the front? And you should take. The other way.
Technically, I'm not savvy. I normally just don't use microphones. I think we have so many people, and I know we come from different ages. So if you are not mobile, not quite mobile, you can sit on the mat and do the upper part of your body. If you are pretty active, for example, I notice some of you are pretty active. You can try to find this place. Okay. Sorry. You hear me? Okay, forget about this. That's all right. So forget about this. I prefer just if you have some. I shake it off and find a place.